Thank you very much to ECMIA for inviting me to um, give an address to you in your General Assembly. I would like to first express my regret that I'm not able to participate in your event because I have to speak in the plenary of the Business and Human Rights Forum in Geneva on those exact dates that you are expecting me to be there. So let me just present some few ideas on what I would like you to focus on in your meetings, because this will also be important for the report that I'm going to be making for as the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I have been tracking closely the developments in ECMIA insofar as strengthening Indigenous women's organizations in the Americas has progressed, and I would like to congratulate you first for really sustaining the efforts to make ECMIA a real network of Indigenous women's organizations within the region. I would like to give special tribute to Tarsila Rivera Sierra, who has been at the nerve center in ensuring that ECMIA continues to hold its general assemblies and in supporting the efforts of various Indigenous women's organizations in the region. In so far as the issues of Indigenous women are concerned, I know that ECMIA also has been representing several of these issues at the UN Commission on the Status of Women, as well as also presenting some reports with the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And I'd like to congratulate you for doing this as well. Indigenous women also have been very active in the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples, and we were able to really bring on board some of the issues of Indigenous women into the final outcome document of the declaration. But of course, the basis of this is the Article 22.2 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which calls on states jointly with Indigenous peoples to address the causes and solutions to violence against Indigenous women and children. I think this is the core of many of the efforts that we should be doing as Indigenous women. I would like to refer you to the report that I made before the Human Rights Council this year, which is a report focusing on the situation of Indigenous women and children, and presenting some recommendations on what needs to be done to be able to address this more substantially and effectively. But first, I stated in my report that Indigenous women are suffering from multiple forms of discrimination and marginalization, and these different forms are a result of a long history of colonization, nation-state building, and in the existence of patriarchal structures brought from within, brought from outside the communities of Indigenous peoples, but also developed within Indigenous peoples communities. And I think these multiple intersecting causes of women's discrimination and marginalization is something that we need to unpack for us to be able to understand better how to address Indigenous women's issues. The issue of intersecting factors would really look at what the situation of Indigenous women are because of their ethnic identities, because of their socioeconomic status, like their class situation or status within their own communities, as well as because of their sexuality, of their choices of what gender they should be belonging to. Gender oppression cannot be appreciated, within Indigenous women's context if you don't look at the long history of oppression of Indigenous peoples as a collective. the right to self-determination of indigenous peoples have been violated since colonization and also during nation-state building. And this is one problem that has caused a lot of problems for indigenous women as well. Because the right to self-determination is violated, and in many cases, the free prior informed consent of indigenous peoples in general are not obtained when development projects are brought into their communities. But indigenous women as well are not also included when processes to obtain free prior informed consent are done. So usually they would ask the men, and they will get the consent of the men, but the women themselves are not effectively involved in such processes. So I think this is one issue that needs to be looked into. In relation to the issue of lands, territories, and resources, this is also an issue that is not gender neutral. We have to look at the situation of indigenous women insofar as they are inheriting lands, or insofar as their capacities to be able to have better control over the lands, territories, and resources in their territories are also enhanced. Most indigenous women are the ones who are involved in food production and food distribution and ensuring healthy foods are eaten by their families. But the situation for many indigenous women is a situation of grave food insecurity, precisely because their rights to their lands, territories, and resources are not respected. Instead of them producing the domestic food that is healthy and that is needed by their communities, they are usually subjected to the expansion of industrial agricultural plantations, which are mainly meant for export. And this has caused tremendous poverty for indigenous women as well. Even in terms of employment, when these kinds of developments come into indigenous communities, including extractive industries, indigenous women are also not among those who are employed. And therefore, even their chances of gaining income from these activities that happen in their communities are also very much compromised. The issue of the violence against indigenous women, as I mentioned earlier, is a core issue that indigenous women themselves have to address. And this violence has been caused by, of course, the same intersecting factors of discrimination, as well as existing patriarchal structures, whether these are brought in from outside, or they develop within the communities. Violence against indigenous women is very insidious. It's happening everywhere. And in my report, I referred a lot to the missing and murdered women in Canada among the First Nations women, as well as in the United States. I also mentioned about the disproportionate representation of indigenous women in penal penal institution, in jails. There is a report which I showed where the Maori women, for instance, are even higher. They have a higher number in jails in New Zealand compared to the Maori men. And of course, there's a disproportionate representation of Maoris in general compared to the average population. So this is the kind of situation that many indigenous women face. They are subjected to serious human rights violations, where they either disappear, they are subjected to violence because of state military operations, but they are also subjected to violence because of operations of trafficking syndicates. They are trafficked, and this is the reason why there are lots of missing women as well. And I think that this is what is happening not just in Canada, not just in the United States, but even in many different parts in Latin America. For instance, in Mexico, we have heard about those 43 teachers who disappeared in Mexico, and up to now nobody knows whatever happened to them. And in some of these, the parents that I was able to speak with some of the parents of these victims, and they are so distraught because they still don't know what happened to their children. So these kinds of problems, I think, are problems that still need to be addressed. So therefore, we would like to really push for some recommendations in relation to which governments or the UN or Indigenous communities should undertake. One recommendation is to really use a very holistic framework in addressing Indigenous women's issues. A holistic framework springs from the fact that all human rights are indivisible and universal, and these intersect with all the different human rights violations. So we cannot just address the issues of Indigenous women from a very narrow perspective, but we need to really look at all the various aspects of how Indigenous women's rights to self-determination, to lands, territories, and resources, to sexual and reproductive health, as well as their cultural rights and the right to education. All of these different rights are very interlinked with each other, and if Indigenous women are not enjoying these rights, then there should really be a more comprehensive and holistic manner developed to address these problems. For sexual and reproductive health, we should really continue doing the actions that you have taken in terms of pushing states to develop intercultural health programs that really integrates traditional healing systems as well as the modern healing systems, and Indigenous women are given the choice on how they would like to give birth, or how they would like to take care of their children, how they would like to rear their children, and all these different programs or activities that women have to do. In terms of addressing the issues of missing and murdered women and trafficked women, there should really be a closer monitoring of what is happening to these various Indigenous women, and reporting should be made more effectively and in a sustained manner to CEDAW, as well as to the Commission on the Status of Women, as well as the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and to my mandate as the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Issues. I would like to look at the issues of Indigenous women and in all the reports that I'm making. So even when I visit countries, I do official country visits, I would always push for a specific audience with Indigenous women so that they will be able to express the problems that they face as women, as Indigenous peoples, and of course as citizens of the country where they belong to. So with this, I would like to just congratulate you once more for being able to hold this General Assembly, and I hope you will be able to develop programs and plans in terms of how to make more visible the issues of Indigenous women, how to get the UN agencies like UNFPA, UN Women, even UNDP to really deal and target the situation of Indigenous women, and also to get states to address the issues of Indigenous women using the recommendations that are contained in my report. I would certainly like you to read my report, which is translated in Spanish as well, so that you can use this as a basis for the work that you will be doing in the future. So my warm congratulations to all of you again, and my apologies for not being able to be there, but I trust that you are all very concerned about empowering yourselves as Indigenous women and continuing the struggle to get the rights of Indigenous women respected, protected, and fulfilled. Thank you very much.